before we begin, I'm going to make sure that I'm recording this, but as well, just as a reminder, I'm going to ask that if you are joining us through Zoom, that you mute your microphone so there is no feedback. Additionally, there will be time for questions at the end of the webinar. However, feel free to type your questions in the Zoom chat box that you can see at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Or if you're joining us through Facebook Live, you can also comment your questions there. And finally, again, we are recording this webinar for those who are not able to attend today's celebrations. So today we do have Stephen Quinn, who is a Career Development Coordinator at Empower. And he is going to talk about strategies and rights for job seekers and employees with disabilities. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it along to Stephen.
Thanks so much, Caitlin. I'm very happy to be here with everyone today. And yeah, I just wanted to have this opportunity to talk to you guys about disability disclosure, especially as it relates to employment. My role here at Empower, the Disability Resource Center, is to help people with disabilities reach their career goals. And that involves education, entrepreneurism, and also employment, of course. Yeah, just perhaps to start, a couple of different experiences that I've had myself personally around disclosure, and two very different outcomes. Disclosure for me, I remember once I was interviewing for a position with a group home. And in the group home, there were people living with disabilities. And it was something that I was excited about. I am a person with a disability as well. And I remember I had traveled abroad for that position. And I'd been there for a week or so. And I managed to get to have some time to sit down with the executive director of the organization. And I remember the question that she asked me was just, tell me your story and about you. And at the time, that was a question that I never really had much practice with before. And I remember I didn't really know how to talk about my disability. And I kind of skirted around it a bit. And I remember not being very clear about what my needs were in the workplace, if they were different or not. And I think I left some doubt in her mind as to just my own, how my disability was going to affect my work and my knowledge of my own disability. And I remember after that interview, I didn't get the position. Maybe 2 or 3 years after that, I remember having an interview at the Independent Living Resource Center in St. John's. And that's who we were, actually, before we were Empower. What a very different experience I had at that time, because I had acknowledged the strengths of my disability and, you know, being able to sit with other people with disabilities and recognize that each person can be the expert about their disability, and realizing that the way I spoke about my disability and the strengths that I had really developed because of my disability were important things that I could talk to my employer about. So two really different outcomes with jobs that were very similar at the time. And you know, I would imagine that people here have had very different outcomes with interviews as well. So today I just want to talk about disclosure and how it might relate to you. Hopefully you can see the PowerPoint that I'm sharing right now. It just says disclosure and accommodation, and there's some pictures there. So I'm just going to start with my first slide. So with disclosure, when disclosing, I think that considering all of the questions, if I should disclose, why I should disclose, what exactly I should say, who I should tell it to, when I should say it, and how I say it. And I'd like to just go through all of these step by step today with you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to speak up. Please ask if you have any comments. I'm more than happy to give the floor to you as well to have a chat. So the first thing I just want to say that disclosure is your choice. And that means that you can still be an honest person and not disclose your disability. Sometimes people might feel that you have to disclose your disability or you're being dishonest. That's not true. You do not need to disclose your disability to be honest to your employer. It depends on where you draw your own boundaries and the lines that you draw about what you want to say, when you want to say it. So disclosure is your choice. And I think that if you can kind of start from there, then I think that's a really good place to start, knowing that it's your choice, because once it becomes your choice, it becomes something that you have control over. If you feel it's something that you need to do, which is kind of the way that I felt with my first, when I had that interview at a group home, I felt that I needed to tell my employer right away. And I wasn't really comfortable talking about my disability at the time, and so it was very difficult. But again, it's your choice, okay? So starting out there, I think that, knowing that you can be honest and not talk about your disability or not disclose your disability. Okay. So, but let's first of all talk about the if around your disclosure. Should I tell my employer that I have a disability? It's obviously your first choice, right? So if I do and if I don't. Legally, the Human Rights Commission states that a disability is only relevant to the job if your disability threatens the safety or property of others or prevents you from doing a safe job yourself. So around safety, if you ever did think that your disability threatened the safety or property of the employer or put you in an unsafe position, then you might want to talk about your disability. However, I'll say too, sometimes employers have view that perhaps your disability does threaten the safety of someone else, and that's not necessarily the case. I think if the employer ever has that opinion and you sense that they have that opinion, then it's probably a good thing to talk about your disability and how you can work safely, so that offering to the employer your ability to work safely and your understanding of working safely, and how you're going to work safely and how you're going to also to protect your own safety. Okay. The other point there, that the only time that a disability is irrelevant is if efforts are made to accommodate the disability. And we'll talk a little more about accommodation. But again, I think the disability and if you disclose your disability is still your choice. And I think that highlighting how you can work safely is something that you can do. And that's something that you can practice as well, about how you can work safely in the position that you're in. For me, again, the example that I had at that group home, perhaps my own, just the way I shared my disability, and I'm a mental health services consumer. Perhaps I did not leave the employer in a position where they were confident that I would be able to handle a difficult situation. When really, my disability is a strength that I have because, my own mental health is something that I'm always monitoring. And, I may have better mental health than somebody that doesn't have a mental health disability, because I'm so sensitive of what works for me and what isn't. And then, being in the opportunity or in the workplace where I could work with other people with disabilities, my own experience of my disability really helps me understand how someone else with a disability might be feeling at the time, and strategies working with that person. So again, the if I disclose is also the how I disclose. But first of all, just to say, if your disability is an invisible one, then you can choose whether or not to disclose. And even if your disability is visible, you may still choose whether or not to talk about that disability. And those are your choices. That's the first choice, really, right? If I'm going to talk about my disability. And again, it's your choice. It really is your choice. If anyone has any questions, again, feel free to chime in. So also, there's the why of disclosure. It helps yourself to ask, why do I want to share with my employer that I have a disability? And probably the main reason, the first reason that people decide that they're going to disclose their disability is because they require an accommodation in the workplace. So accommodation is any modification or adjustment to the work environment or the work schedule or the work or the job description that will allow you to do the job in a more effective manner. So the main reason that people do disclose their disability is because they are looking for an accommodation. An example, in my current position, disclose that sometimes mornings are very difficult for me because of medication and things like that. So a start time for me, instead of starting at 8:30 in the morning, just starting at 9 o'clock in the morning is more effective. It just gives me a little more time in the mornings to get going. So, but the only way that I can get that accommodation from an employer is if I decide to talk about my disability. You may disclose, well, you need to disclose your disability if you're looking for an accommodation, because the employer needs to know what the accommodation is and why you need it. Another reason, another why to disclose is if you're looking for added support, supports that are available for employees, like in an employee assistance program. And an employee assistance program may have counseling that's available. They may have therapists that are available. There are a lot of different supports through employee assistance programs. Sometimes it could be, looking at some disability leave, or it could be a disability ease back to work after leaving. So employee assistance programs are important. Another reason, you may want to show that your disability is not an issue. Oftentimes, you could be working with an employer and they may not know about your disability. And maybe, it's just, you talk about your disability because it's something that's not an issue. and the employer may not know about your disability, or your disability just doesn't create any barriers or any difficulties in the workplace. So you may then want to show that your disability is not an issue. So it could be just a kind of a topic to talk about. Confiding in a coworker, having an ally in the workplace, someone that you can talk to about what's happening and what's difficult. Maybe there's a coworker that you get along with really well, and you just want to have someone that you can talk to about what's happening and things like that. So talking to a coworker is certainly a reason to disclose. Just talking to your boss, perhaps the most important relationship that you have at your workplace is with your supervisor or with the boss, and having a relationship with your boss, and a trustworthy relationship where you can talk to your boss about what's happening. There's nothing really greater than having an ally at work that's your boss, that acknowledges that there may be accommodations that are needed, or just being able to talk to them about, maybe you're worried about what's happening at work and about how things are working out or not working out at the time, and having a boss that you can talk to about that and sit down and confide to and talk about strategies perhaps that you can come up with that will help you in the workplace, right? And having that, talking to your boss is a good reason to disclose, and being able to disclose. And last of all, I'll just put there, some people want to be that real life example of what it is to have a disability in the workplace, and again, kind of being an example of what it's like to have a disability. Again, any questions, please feel free. I can't see the comments section. I'm not sure if anyone, how I get that.
Hi, Stephen. This is Caitlin. So we don't have any questions yet, but I will let you know when we do. Yeah, you're welcome.
This is my first time doing leading a Zoom meeting with PowerPoint and all of that, and there's a lot of new stuff happening right now in the workplace. Thanks for your help, Caitlin, and thanks for everyone else that's there. So the first thing is, if you're going to disclose, the next question then is why you're going to disclose. So let's move on to the what, or how much. So what you're going to disclose. So again, what and how much you decide to disclose is up to you. I think the first thing, I'm just going to go look at the last bullet there. It says that you may find that an employer is more cooperative if you trust them and you provide them with more information. Especially if you're having difficulty at the time in the workplace, sharing that fact with your employer that you are having some difficulty at the workplace, letting them know that the difficulty that you're having may be disability related. That all starts the conversation with, how can we accommodate you in the workplace at that time, right? So if you're having difficulty and you've decided that you're going to talk to your boss, and having a trusting relationship with them, and being able to provide them with information, and being able to have a conversation with your boss is a really big thing. So the what you disclose and how much you disclose, especially with the person that you're trying to troubleshoot this with, or that you're trying to give the information to the person that is going to be able to identify that. That being said, of course, you may tell your employer that shift work is difficult because of your disability or because of medication that you take, but you may not share what that medication is or what that disability is. You may also explain that you need, flexible hours, but again, not what the disability is. You can also get doctor's notes to support your request for that, and the doctor may never mention what your disability is, just what the needs are and things like that. But I think, at the heart of all of that is to have a trusting and confidential relationship with your employer and with your boss. Being able to have that confidential information with your boss, that's really, really important, that that you can talk to that person about what is happening, and how it's affecting you, and what you need help with. I think that's probably one of the keys, is having a trusting relationship with someone at your place of employment. So again, that what you disclose goes to who you're disclosing it to, who you're talking to. And again, who you disclose to is your choice. You may ask yourself, who really needs to know? You may tell a supervisor, but not a coworker, or you may tell a coworker and not your supervisor. It depends on what your needs are at the time, right? And so who needs to know is a question that you can ask yourself. And again, like if it's, you're looking for an ally or someone that you can talk to, another coworker, about what's happening in the workplace, maybe that's just something that you need to sit down with and talk to someone. Again, if it comes to the supervisor, you may be having difficulty in the workplace, and you just need to be able to talk about some strategies that you need in order to feel more comfortable, and to feel just to feel that you have that ally. And when it comes to disclosure too, that's something that you can practice. Disclosing your disability with a friend, or with a family member, or with a professional, or with an employment counselor, with a psychologist. I think, again, having a trusting relationship and being able to talk to someone about your disability, perhaps before you talk to your employer. Again, my own example, hadn't really talked about my disability with anyone before. My disability was new at the time too. I think this was, my disability for me came about around 2000, 2001. And then that first interview was in 2003 at another community that I had traveled to. And yeah, I had never talked about my disability before, really, and trying to talk about it for the first time with an employer, and about some of the worries that I had and some of the struggles that I had, without talking about the strengths and the things that I had learned about myself because of my disability, and how that would help me relate to other people that had disabilities and special needs, or specific needs, or maybe at the time in crisis, and my own crisis, and being able to understand how to handle my own crisis, really could, I could have shared information that would allow me to help other people better, right? But I needed really to be able to talk that out with someone beforehand, and really understand that. When it came to to interviewing with the Independent Living Resource Center, at the time, I had had volunteer work where I had volunteered with organizations that work with people with disabilities, like the Hub, which is a place in St. John's that works with people with physical disabilities. And I had done some volunteer work as well with the Independent Living Resource Center. And that really informed me about my disability, about how my disability allowed me to relate to other people, about, just being more comfortable talking to a future employer. And I think, again, that practice, talking about your disability and really exploring how your disability can be a strength and can be, a real way of relating to people, and can break you out of yourself and bring you closer and to closer relationship and communion with other people. The who that we talk to, again, it's your choice, but I always recommend that you feel more comfortable yourself with your disability and how to talk about it, and to practice it with somebody that's really safe first, right? Could be a parent, could be a doctor, but a friend, and try it out. And those things are things that you can practice beforehand. And that's something that I can do too. Whether you're in Nova Scotia or in St. John's right now, we're working through Zoom and through Skype and through distance. So, the world is a smaller place. And I'll give you my contact information at the end as well. Again, please, if any questions, you can type them up. Caitlin will relay them to me for sure.
Hi, Stephen. So we actually do have a question from my co-worker, actually, Catherine Brown. So she says, it can be hard to know your needs sometimes when you first start a job. Stephen, what would you say is a good way to bring this up? Say when you are 1 to 2 months into the job. I know I have worked with individuals who really don't know what they may need at the time, and then realize maybe they would like some support.
It's a great question. I guess the first thing, just for people to know, when you disclose and when you decide to disclose is up to you as well. It's your choice. So you may very well be into a month or two, after you've started the job. Disclosure happens in many different times. The when that you disclose is your choice. Just to handle the question first before we go right into the different times that you can. If you've been into the job, perhaps it looked like everything was clear sailing, and you feel very comfortable with the position, and you're working away, and perhaps something comes up that is difficult, and you're not sure how to handle the situation at the time, sometimes that could be disability related, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just kind of growing pains within the job. And then I think that just talking about strategies to handle the difficulty with a coworker, talking about strategies to handle with your boss at the time, those are good things to be able to talk about some of the difficulty that you might be having, and some effective ways of handling that difficulty. If this becomes a disability issue, then again, trying to talk about inclusion in the workplace, possibly perhaps the barrier that comes up could be one of a physical barrier in the workplace, that something's not working out. Maybe you know, part of your job involves going to other organizations that may not be physically accessible at the time. So talking about accessibility for the job, and how to have an accessible workplace is something that's important for sure. And finding ways to be able to do your work, and to do it in an environment that is accessible for everyone. Really important for sure. But again, you know, if you're having some barriers that are coming up, and you know, you're just getting into the job, um, again, you know, knowing your own strengths are an important thing to be able to say, you know, these are the things that I do really well. And if there are barriers that are coming up, how can I remove those barriers so that I can use my own skill set at the time? So, you know, again, um, disclosure, um, you know, it may require talking about some of the barriers that are coming up in your job, but that doesn't mean that you don't have the strengths that are working in your job. And it's just a matter of how can we remove those barriers, and that can be a successful conversation to have with your employer. So again, around disclosure, when you disclose, again, that's your choice. You know, all of these things that I'm talking about today, I just really want you to know, first of all, that it's your choice. And again, that's the most empowering part, because how you disclose and how you talk about removing barriers is something that you can be the expert in, and it's your choice. So again, like I've disclosed in cover letters, you know, there's advantages and disadvantages to all of these. Certainly, you know, if you were applying to a place like an independent living center in your community, you know, talking about your disability in your cover letter is going to be a great thing, because, you know, we are, oh, sorry about that. That's a little bell that I have on my computer. It's called a mindful clock, and I don't know how to turn it off. It dings every hour. So anyways, but yeah, so when you disclose, you know, disclosing in a cover letter, it depends on the audience that you're talking to. Certainly, if you're applying to a place that works with people with disabilities, then talking about your disability, disclosing that you have a disability and how that's affected your worldview could be a really positive thing to do. Other times, perhaps you may feel that talking about your disability, maybe it's not as necessary in the cover letter. Maybe there are other things that are just more important you talk about. So yeah, you can disclose in the cover letter. Again, it's about who's my audience and what's important right now. When you get the call for the interview, again, some people might need an accommodation right away, you know, just to make sure that the place is wheelchair accessible, or perhaps they need to set up an ASL interpreter. You know, if you get that call for the interview and you do need an accommodation for the interview, that's obviously a good time to disclose. During the interview, you can talk about, maybe, again, you know, you want to talk about the strengths that have come from being a person with a disability, the strategies for overcoming barriers are things that you want to talk about. Maybe that's something you feel you want to talk about during an interview. Also, during an interview, sometimes you may get the impression that the employer is, sometimes, you know, employers might see the disability as a barrier for you working safely or working with that organization. Maybe you just want to talk about the disability. It's like talking about the, you know, acknowledging that some employers may have difficulty understanding how a person with a disability could do the job. Hey, maybe you just want to just say, I'm sensing that, you're perhaps worried that I can do this safely. And then to assure them, that this is something that you can do safely. Perhaps that involves, showing a time that you supported someone in the past through a crisis or through a difficult time in their life, and showing how your disability could be, again, a benefit, and certainly how your disability is not a barrier. Again, you may, a month or two after you've started the job, you may decide to disclose. You may want to wait until you've got you've gone through the probationary period. Maybe you want to wait, make sure that you've done that before you talk about your disability. And of course, you may never disclose. You may never disclose your disability. So again, all choices that are there for you. And again, when you start having difficulty, or when you come upon a barrier, right? That may be the time that you just decide to disclose. And again, like, as I think Caitlin, you mentioned, said Catherine had mentioned, like, if you've been there for a couple of months and you're like, oh, okay, this isn't working out smoothly here for me. Maybe it could be a physical accessibility problem, or it could be just another thing that you're having difficulty with. Then, that can be the time to sit down and strategize about how you can remove that barrier, and then talk to your employer about that. So, I think that what I'm saying here, it's certainly how you disclose your disability is really important, right? And we can talk about, like, how's, like, the doing it in an email, in a letter, with a doctor's note. A formal meeting is always probably the best way to do it, face to face with your supervisor, with your boss, rather than through an email or a text or something like that, where the tone can be difficult sometimes. So always recommend, certainly, face to face is probably the best way to do that. Again, the information that you decide to share is up to you. But how you disclose is likely going to change as you learn what works for you, and as you gain experience and confidence with your disability. And remember that nobody knows more about your disability than you. And, you are, first of all, about how people see disability, is about, how you feel about your disability and how you can talk about your disability. And that's, as you get more and more experience with it, I think it will become different how you talk about your disability. Yeah.
Hi,
And
Steve.
like,
This is Caitlin. We do have another question, just to pop in quickly. So we have a question from Colleen, and she's saying, or asking, sometimes people don't want to disclose their disability in fear they will be judged on work ethic. Has this happened? And if so, what do you do?
A lot of people, and rightfully so, people are worried about how their disability may be received by an employer. I think if you have a sense that that your employer is worried about work ethic or anything like that, again, it's a good thing to talk about with your employer. You don't need to talk about your disability necessarily if you think they're worried about work ethic or anything. And again, an honest conversation with your employer about how work is going, being able to sit down and talk about what's working and what isn't working. Um, Definitely, though, I know again, to just to go back to my first example about, you know, if I was sharing my life story with someone, maybe if I didn't talk about my disability at the time, that that wouldn't have become an issue. Who knows? I could be working there to this day. Um, but again, I think the real core thing is how you talk about your disability. Um, and maybe you want to wait until you talk about your disability, until you have a more trusting relationship built up. And maybe, when it comes to work ethic, Colleen, um, waiting until you feel that you can have that important conversation with your employer rather than perhaps, right out of the gate. Um, Again, though, like, if you're sensing that the employer, perhaps your disability is very visible, your employer is making a judgment that that you're not able to handle the work, and they're perhaps linking that to your disability. It just becomes a conversation about um, about about the work, about the factual things that are happening in work. It may not be disability related at all. Being able to have a conversation with what's working and what isn't working in the workplace, um, and that's separate from disability to start with, right? And if there are, issues and barriers that are coming up because of your disability, then having that conversation is an important conversation to have. Um, but I understand, if there is a judgment that that you're not doing the work and it's your disability, that's definitely something that we all face as, having a disability and being in the workplace. I think it's something that we feel from time to time. I hope that answers your question, Colleen. Again, like, it's your choice. And, what I want you to remember is that, um, to focus on your abilities and your strengths, because disability does not mean inability. You can be brief and to the point, and most importantly, tell the employer how your disability can benefit them, right? And even if you're in the workplace, maybe that's a good discussion to have with your employer about how your ability and your strengths and your disability can be a benefit to them. Knowledge is power, for sure. For example, if you need an adaptive technology, then you should know what adaptive tech you need, what the cost of it is. You may already have it, and letting your employer know what the accommodation is that you need, and being able to let your employer know, and when you're coming up with difficulties in the workplace, if you know what the accommodation is and how that can remove that difficulty, that's a really important thing. So knowledge is power, and knowing what your disability is. Again, remembering that you are the expert of your own disability, you are the educator. You can be as honest and as factual as you can and indicate what your accommodations are. And, be your own advocate. So be positive, and, a little humor can go a long way. But certainly, be positive and find the important things first of all. And that's most everything that I want to talk to you about today. Again, it's your choice, and your own knowledge of your disability and what works for you, and then being able to share that with an employer and being able to talk to them at a time when you feel it's appropriate. And those are all important things that you have control over. And that's most everything that I would like to talk about today. Any other questions, please feel free to put them through. I think I've gone over a little bit on my time, and I don't want to infringe on the next person that's coming after me. But
All
thanks so much
right.
for your time today.
And thank you so much, Stephen, for coming and presenting. We do have a few questions that we can quickly go through. So the first one is, if you experienced a situation from before, and this is from Carrie Ann, I should mention, and it still impacts you and you base everything else on that one situation, how do you manage that? And I'm assuming that managing it in terms of even getting new employment.
Right, right. So perhaps, yeah, perhaps there's a barrier that keeps coming up. It might be with how an employer is kind of viewing your disability. Again, like, you know, you are the expert about your disability and about what works and about the strengths that you have. And I think really being able to show an employer that you have those strengths, that you have the opportunity, that you have the ability to do the job, those are important things. If there is, you know, it depends on, of course, what you're experiencing. If it's the employer's perception of the job that you're able to do, then, you know, we need to be able to have a conversation with the employer about how you can do that job, and about allaying the fears that they may have about you being able to do the job. If it's something that's coming up again and again, so perhaps it's a barrier or something in the workplace, you know, whether that's a attitudinal barrier or a physical barrier, or perhaps the scheduling is something that comes up again and again. You know, being able to talk about specific needs that you have, you know, related to your disability. Again, like it might be about shift, about scheduling. You know, it is okay to have barriers and then be able to talk about what accommodations can help overcome those barriers. And that's something I think, you know, needs perhaps a specific conversation with counselor, you know, about the specific barrier that keeps coming up and about how to remove that. So yeah, without knowing a little more specifically, I think it's you know, you can come up with that that strategy to overcome that barrier with someone and then be able to take that to the employer.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then we have time for just one other question. So this is from Amanda. Being someone with an invisible disability working in a retail store, what do you do if you have a coworker who just doesn't understand?
Yeah. I guess the first thing, you know, if you do have a coworker that doesn't understand, first of all, you know, it depends on how much you work with them. Is it worth sitting down and talking to them about it? You know, does that person need to know, first of all? Or maybe, you know, it's a specific thing that that person does that really is challenging. Maybe talking about that specific thing. Maybe as well, it's talking to your supervisor about a difficulty, or about, you know, if you feel that you're being harassed, or you feel that the person doesn't understand what's happening, talking to your employer about, you know, what to do, being able to let them know that you're not feeling comfortable with something that's happening, and, you know, being able to have allies. You know, it may not be, you know, you may not feel comfortable perhaps confronting the person and letting them know that you're not comfortable with certain language that they use, or a way that they treat you. But, you know, having allies at work and having support system of people that you can talk to, you know, about how to approach different difficult people that you may encounter. Again, you know, you have choices and you can talk to other people about it. Yeah. Sometimes it's, you know, you might feel quite comfortable confronting the person or talking to the person and say, you know, I feel uncomfortable with that. Other times you might need an ally and someone else, you know, to help you talk about that. I know sometimes too, I remember the Canadian Mental Health Association had a program called the At Work program, and it was somebody that came in to talk about mental health in the workplace, and you know, having that opportunity to have other people come in from outside and talk about what an accessible and inclusive workplace looks like. And that's, of course, something that we do at Inclusion NL here, a program with Empower as well.
Okay, great. So there are no other questions that I can see, but I want to thank you again, Stephen, for joining us and presenting today as part of our Independent Living Across Canada Day virtual events. So for everyone who will be joining us at our next webinar, it's actually starting in a couple of minutes. But thanks to everyone who did come up for this or join us for this first webinar. And thank you again so much, Stephen.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin.
Okay.
Thanks, Stephen. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.